Okay, good. Okay. Okay, to make this debate really make sense, I used a lot of analogies, so expect a lot of analogies and metaphors. I want to start by talking about the socially awkward child. You know, like when you go to class on your first day or when you're like a teacher, you go into class and you see this kid and you're like, oh no, he's not going to fit in, right? And you feel really bad for him because the thing about this child is that he didn't do anything very wrong. He's just different. He doesn't know the right things to say or the exact perfect cool kids things to do. But then, right, people start to bond over casual meanness and exclusion towards him. Somehow he has become the other. Somehow he has become wrong, despite the fact that he has never done anything wrong. Just nothing that we thought was our narrow definition of okay and normal. And you know what happens to that child when this doesn't change? The child becomes increasingly weird, increasingly a misfit, because he's so uncomfortable where he is. I think it's the perfect analogy for what we are doing today. In the classroom, we can say, oh, the kids are immature, right? They don't know any better. But as adults, operating within a legal system, we should know better than to inflict laws upon things that purely affect the arbitrary thing we call our public sensibilities. On then to my three issues for today. First and foremost, let's discuss what really is a public sensibility and why it cannot be subject to legal parameters. So, very simply, right, the idea of public sensibility simply makes no sense for two reasons. One, that there is no unilateral body called the public. The public is composed of many diverse, different individuals, and there's no way to decide what their sensibility is. At the same time, the very nature of offense is subjective, because people respond differently to different sides and different experiences, and therefore what offends one may not offend the other. Therefore, I put it to you, there is no such one objective idea as a public sensibility that can be offended. Given that, right, to make it work, no thank you, sir, you need arbitrary parameters of what a public sensibility is and what offense of it is. What allows us to decide? It falls then to majority decision, what we kind of think the majority feels. And sometimes it's not even majority decision, but what your old white man in parliament thinks that the majority feels. And that is really problematic. I've already shown you how principally it doesn't represent what is true, but more importantly, it leads to two very fundamental outcomes. First and foremost, we realize that it creates very inconsistent law. Because now the law is not premised on things like real hurts or real harms, quantifiable things. Therefore, you greatly diminish faith in the legal system. When your legal system is meant to be the bedrock that concretely governs what is right and wrong, or what is okay or not, in the country itself, in the moment. But furthermore, you blur the line between hurt and offense. What actually hurts a victim is criminal. But what actually offends a victim on their side is also now criminal. And that really diminishes the power of real victims to come out and say, I've been hurt by a certain crime.
Wait.
Before I go to my next harm closing.
Do you support things like anti-Holocaust denial laws in post-Nazi states or equity policies in debate programs?
Anti-Holocaust denial laws, right, actually are meant to police some real hurt to people. So I don't really see the parallel there. Moving on. Let's look at the second harm that is created. What we realize, right, is that often when you allow for these laws to be in place, they are often used for a very different purpose. They are used to police alternative lifestyles when you have no other rules or laws in place to stop them. I'm talking about things like gay rights, right, where if I can't police two people out there holding hands and hugging, instead I come out and say that offends my public sensibilities, and therefore it is still illegal, it is still not allowed. And we find that a very problematic way of using the law meant to protect the vulnerable to oppress the vulnerable instead. Moving that on to my second point. Here I want to look at a specific case to be extended to look at all other cases in place. This debate is likely, right, to have Gulf arguing for the easiest examples like breastfeeding, and then going for examples more palatable for their side. So I'll do something a bit in between. Let's look at an example of, say, public nudity. How do we defend the idea of public nudity happening? I've already shown you how whether nudity is okay or not is something subjective, right? But more importantly, why is it okay? There are two central parameters as to why something might be okay in our eyes. One, is it consensually decided by an adult? In this case, yes. Two, is there actual concrete hurt done to somebody? In this case, no, there's no hurt done whatsoever, right? And you realize that Holocaust denial is a very different issue, right? Because Holocaust denial is premised on one, the fact that actual hurt has happened and you're pretending, no thank you, sir, that it didn't happen. So we really see that problem there. Okay, moving on, right, now we realize therefore is what is probability dependent on, no thank you, sir. It's the unnatural decision that certain body parts are somehow off limit and forbidden for moral reasons that we do not know and cannot put a why or how to, right? So the problem is that once it's arbitrary, it becomes subject to hurtful values exploiting it, or rather the attempt to use this law to enforce, thank you sir, bad or hurtful values towards people. We see in things, right, like for instance, sexist values. Suddenly, some things are okay for men to be viewed in public, but not for women. And we also realize it gives way to things like rape culture, right? You will dress indecently. You will dress in a way that offends public sensibilities. How can you therefore say that you were the one being hurt when someone rapes you? That is the sort of rhetoric that you give rise to. But the moment we already see it, right? Be exploited, no thank you, sir, by other recent harmful trends, like Islamophobia. In front, the way they don't allow people to wear the hijab anymore. Why is this a parallel situation? Because the minute you say that certain modes of dress are against public sensibilities, then there is no such thing as the idea of consensual freedom and bodily autonomy being held as sacred. And the minute it is not sacred, then it can be easily rolled over or policed by irrational emotional fear and manipulation. Therefore, what you do create are extremely difficult standards for anybody to try and meet. They constantly change, they restrict you, and there's no way to argue against them. No thank you, sir. This is what truly creates things, like clashes of different cultures, like hate and like real conflicts out there. I'm going to move on now to my final point, and I want to talk about the hipsters of the world, very special people. Because let's be honest, maybe it's very easy for you and me to say, I value wearing clothes in public. I value behaving in ways that are the norm, but not everybody is made to live comfortably in boxes. We are privileged, most of us, by the ability to do so, but the thing is that you cannot police how people's minds work, and you don't do it in other situations, right? The only thing people are brought up to believe is that you shouldn't be actually causing real or concrete hurt to people out there. And we do this, right, because people have different values. People understand their brains work in very different ways. And we often live in cultures, right, where we celebrate individual differences. But now you're telling us that you're all special, but you can only be a specific kind of special. Look, when you are comfortable with what you have, it is easy to be what you call good. But every human being needs an outlet. We have already said, right, universal compatible parameters in which this outlet can exist. Don't hurt people, make it consensual. So it is really unfair for you to reset the game and rename it. And we take away the only non-hurtful outlets for unconventional people. People act out even further. And that's when you get actual hurtful and illegal actions and things happening. Therefore, just like how something that's repugnant to you is not to them, the reverse is true. Let's go for tolerance. I'm extremely proud to propose.
For that speech, but welcome to your policies.
Today, this asexual, half Indian, half Chinese mongrel is proud to stand here and tell you that no government can make society a safe space for everyone. And if it's forced to choose, it should make society a safe space for the majority, because that's the only feasible option. We are also going to tell you, since minorities have some interests which we need to consider, that in the long term, this is what gains them greater acceptance, and we're happy to sacrifice the identity and self-expression of minorities in the short term for winning real, genuine fights for them in the long term. 2 points. Firstly, why offense and offense alone is a legitimate ground for the formulation of public policy. Secondly, how we change the way in which minorities are seen in the long term. Some rebuttal, first of all. We hear that identities are arbitrary and hence it's bad to make laws based on them. But all identities are arbitrary and it does not make them any less real. A person who's anti-feminist can't say, well, you're born a woman, so presumably your identity can't possibly matter because it wasn't chosen. We need to talk about real harm to real people who are genuinely and sincerely religious and not just liberals, because it's not just the identities which matter. They say, well, the public is diverse. There's no such thing as one public. True, but that does not mean we can't make reasonable estimates of what the vast majority of people think and feel. That's how we're forced to make policy. If we had to make one law for every individual, government would collapse. Thirdly, they say offense is subjective. No, thank you. Psychological harm is taken into account in laws all the time. In the case of sexual assault or rape laws, for instance, the reason why we punish you more for doing those things is because they don't just assault the body, they assault the subjective mind. If you totally are going to reject all subjective criteria, then there's no unique evil to sexual assault or rape that the law could possibly take into account. We can reasonably have psychologists, people who interview these individuals, we can people who study these cultures and what the concept of offense means, inform the law, and have the government make policy based on that. Then they say they want to talk about things like policing alternate lifestyles. We think we have to police alternate lifestyles. If we don't police alternate lifestyles in at least this relatively mild manner, then what will substitute and come in for that is something which is a whole lot worse, as I will tell you. Lastly, they say, well, these standards are impossible for anyone to know how they're supposed to follow because it's all based on the concept of offense. This seems like a fairly trivial issue, of how individual laws happen to be drafted, right? I mean, often that law can specify specifically what kind of action it's targeting. For instance, an anti-Christian proselytization law in Malaysia, in Iran, could say that we don't think anyone who self-identifies as a Christian should be able, to preach in any public place. So we don't think they're always that hard to police. But if the boundary is unclear, we're willing to take that hit. Many more important things are at stake in this debate today. So let's be clear what exactly we stand for. We're not going to give you individual instances of which policies we're going to support. What we're going to say is that, broadly speaking, there's some plausible examples we could give you that we could defend as being okay things and legit things for a government to do. I'll take opening, actually.
So let's compromise this, right? If many people think that public breastfeeding is not okay, why would you support a law banning it?
Because this causes immense psychological harm to people who don't like seeing breasts in public. So, first of all, let's not talk about why offense is a legitimate ground for the formulation of public policy. We tell you today that your personal, individual, deepest secret identity is at least in part largely defined by the society in which you live. This is a fairly trivial observation that no man is an island, right? And you can't conceive of yourself in abstract from living in a society whose texture is something you approve of, whose norms are something which you can feel proud of, so they can go and interact with people in public spaces and feel like you are at home. Now, we tell you that the harms for the vast majority of individuals in many of these laws are genuine and real, which is why we had no good response to the point about why is it that in Israel it's probably not okay for us to have a law, or not have laws, banning people from displaying Nazi symbols in public. Us liberals have lots of sympathy for Jews, but we also should have sympathy for people who are conservative. For instance, if you live in a Mormon community and you believe that God's judgment will fall on your community as a whole, if there are public displays of affection which are allowed and violate those sacred spaces of the body, it does cause immense distress to you that the tenor of your society is changing from one which is approved by God, and that means you're going to be punished, right? In the Old Testament, God often judges societies in toto, and that could be important for conservative societies. But it might also mean that if you see someone proselytizing, you feel assaulted by their attempt to destroy the very fabric and the very premise upon which society was built as a community of God. And this extends to even things, like breastfeeding, right? Often conservative opposition to breastfeeding stems from the idea that this is a special sacred act and it shouldn't be put in public because it's something obscene. Now, do I agree with the attitude? No, I think it's kind of weird, to be honest. But is the harm real to people? Yes. Why must governments go with the majority in this instance? No, thank you. Because we think that the government needs to undertake, I'll be frank, a fairly utilitarian calculus on what it has to do. And in this case, when the vast majority of people will not stand for that, your duty to create a functional, welcoming society needs to err on someone's side, and if it's not the vast majority, you are committing a moral evil. But I'd also like to point to you, if you err on the side of minorities, even in these minor instances, that's often something which is unsustainable because your government is now seen as premising its idea of a good society on what the minority wants. And that tends to create unsustainable society. I suppose an extreme example is Syria, which is in war right now, but that's a bit weird. Let's give you something more moderate. Poland, where a rapid liberalizing, modernizing effort led by the previous government was rejected en masse by the conservative majority, which rolled back those reforms and put the Law and Justice Party in power, which is now actively cracking down on homosexual lifestyles and has tons of cases going to the European court. So if we at least want to prevent radical backsliding and vast loss of social support, we think our policy is in many instances absolutely necessary. Now let's talk about minorities and what happens to them in the long term. We tell you that these actions cause create genuine hostility, and increased hostility, between minorities and conservative majorities in many of these countries for a couple of reasons. Firstly, these actions show that you are not trying to engage with the majority at the level of argument. You are asserting your identity without their say-so, without actually trying to persuade them of anything. Often this leads to otherization, right? The main argument used against feminists is that they're just weird people who want to offend us. They don't actually care about things which matter. It's all about the politics of offense. Every time Pussy Riot bears their tops in this protest, Vladimir Putin actually retweets them because he knows this is what gets him support, that we see these individuals as being fundamentally other. And this causes harm because when people see you as other, they don't listen to your argument. Human brains are funny like that. If you're not engaged in any kind of common social project, they will listen to you. What's the issue here? The issue is that many of these oppressed minorities face much bigger problems. If you're a woman, there are many more problems for you than not being allowed to breastfeed in public. If you're a religious minority, there's a lot more issues than proselytization, what about funding for schools? A movement which wants to portray these individuals and get that change in the long term cannot afford to show that these people are in public out there to offend your identity and set themselves apart from you. You need to undertake those actions which least offend the sensibilities, at least go to the government, write a white paper, get advocacy organizations to say maybe it's a good idea for sustaining of the society that we do that. These actions are trivial compared to many of the other harms, but they're not seen as trivial. They're seen as some of the most offensive things you can do to the conservative majority. They undermine progress, and for what it's worth, we are happy to air the majority. I'm very proud of those.
We thank the leader for that speech.
So much paper, nothing to say.
Let's just get one thing clear, like, Ashish saying that you feeling bad is equal to massive psychological hurt is not true. People feeling bad is not depression or is not massive psychological hurt. People not able to do things that they really want to because of public sensibilities that are arbitrary and that are not defined and are morally inconspicuous, we tell you that's real psychological hurt. I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to talk about the principle of public sensibility and the laws that come about and counter whatever they said. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the whole weird point about like backlash and like majority will like kill you or something. And last thing, I'm going to talk about things that Hui talked about that they gave no fucks about and didn't want to talk about. But before that, we tell you that the hurt in anti-Holocaust laws and equity laws is really different, right? Because where does this stem from? This stems from actual harm that was committed against people, in the past, or is committed against people continuously over the years, right? At the point of time where you ban things that go against these harms or against these things that have been committed against those people, we tell you it's worse, and it's very different from public sensibilities, because public sensibilities are not the things that are offended in these things. The things that the offense that is taken here and the point of these laws is to actually not forget and not give not just like dumb down the emphasis of actual harm that was committed against those people in the past. What is public sensibility? We told you multiple things. We told you public sensibilities come from a variety of things, like public is diverse, offense is subjective. They told us that you can make reasonable estimates as to what the real public sensibility is. I don't think that's true. I guess you can't, because they exist on a spectrum, right? A number of people believing a number of different things and what kind of things that they believe public sensibility is. But even if that's true, right? We tell you that harms exist on a spectrum. I don't think it causes depression to the people who watch others breastfeed, but I think it causes real harm to that woman who's not able to do that in public, right? We tell you that's the real harm that we want to talk about. I think the hurt is far worse for people who are not able to do it or not able to engage in those activities. Just because the number of people who feel bad watching these things is more than the number of people who want to do these things doesn't make it right? At the point of time with the number of people, even though lesser and even though in minority want to do these things and are basically and like majority of the decision revolve around doing these things is far more important than the number of people who feel bad watching these things. play, right? We tell you different people have different sense of what offends them. A liberal person in LA versus a conservative person in Pakistan, even the same countries have different conceptions of what things hurt them, very different from each other. And this just leads to public sensibilities from the majority dominating the legislation at the end of the day. They have no rebuttal to that, right? Unlike arbitrary criteria that isn't defined to a certain extent as to what, as to how to go about magnifying these laws to cover the most part of the country. The laws that come about are largely dominated by the majority rhetoric, right? And that's far back. Sit down, and that's really bad, right? Because these laws are mostly inconsistent based on the spectrum of harm that we were talking about before, and the spectrum of offense that different people from different kinds of groups in the public take. We tell you these inconsistent laws have actual real harms on people who transgress them, because these are the people who lose faith in the legal system and its ability to protect them at the end of the day. But more importantly, hurt and offense is far worse to these people who transgress these laws instead of the people who feel bad when people transgress these laws. In terms of backlash, right? That was really weird, because at the point of time when these laws exist, the backlash is far worse for the people who transgress. The backlash of legal as well as social backlash against you is far worse and magnified under their side. We tell you at the point of time that people who actually want to do it, go ahead and do it. It becomes really bad for them. Of course, people are not stupid, right? If they foresee a potential societal backlash against them and violence against them, of course they won't engage in these activities flamboyantly, right? At that point of time, we tell you it's far worse. And under their side, I don't think the conception that Ashish wanted to bring about was right. But before that, yeah, opening, because we didn't engage in you before. Yeah.
So you say that, but this offense is slight. But your verdict is absolute. And in many countries, a woman can be stoned or attacked in the street for being seen as liberal. So are you sure this offense is just a small by the wayside?
Well, that's what I was talking about right now, right? At the point of time where you face violent backlash, you won't engage in that activity. But at the point of time in other countries where you want to do it and you won't face a violent backlash, we tell you it's far okay to go ahead and do it. At that point of time, it depends on the mental state of the person and whether he wants to do it or not. I think people are reasonable people who can make decisions for themselves and can face or not face the violent backlash. I think that conception is really wrong, right? Why would anybody want to opt in to places where they might die just because of breastfeeding in public, right? I think that's really weird coming from Ashish. But more importantly, conclusion is how these things get changed, right? How these norms of offense grow and grow beyond boundaries, right? Because at some point in the past or past century, homosexuals were considered offensive to you. At the point of time when people take executive action and say that that is not true and homosexuals are okay people to live in this society, that's when people tend to believe that that might be something true. Because state deciding laws and state deciding policies actually changes the mindsets of people on the ground following these policies, right, Mr. Speaker? But now these things change and boundaries of offense change when executive action is taken, when people are forced to deal with it, when people are forced to confront those things at the very start. That's when they realize the nuances behind those things coming about, behind those policies coming about, and why those policies are important for the people who follow them, or for the people who these policies protect. Or at the very least, is forced to confront these policies, even if they don't realize the nuance, even if they don't appreciate the nuance. They're forced to confront these things in order to deal with them. I think the boundaries of offense and the boundaries of hurt taken by these people, even magnified to the kinds of depression that Ashish was talking about, grow, and those boundaries grow. At that point of time, you can actually incorporate more and more policies that give people that ability to actualize what they want to do more and more. And I think that's a better outcome. What are the kinds of things that you do not want to deal with? We told you multiple things about people who are socially awkward, or people who have already been boxed in multiple times in their lives. Right? At that point of time, they're not able or not able to fall into the norms or fall into the closed circles the state provides them or the state wants them to fit in. We tell you, and for these people, it's especially important that we provide these laws. We provide things that we provide, or we go beyond things that offend public sensibilities, because these people do not conform to the laws that already exist. And for these people, it's impossible for them to conform to these laws. We tell you, at that point of time, you break the box of which they have existed in previously. We tell you that's very important. We told you multiple things, how culture changes around these people, how people on the other side are able to accept the different kind of lifestyle or the different kind of lives that these special people or these special kinds of individuals are able to live. What do we tell you at the end of the day? We told you multiple things. We told you that the difference between hurt and offense is real, and psychological hurt does not equal feeling bad about certain things. We told you it's better that we escape the boundaries that currently restrict us right now. We told you multiple things about socially awkward and different special people, and that's why we think we take the debate.
welcome to everybody to your conference.
Three things in this speech. The first is why the side of government, the apathetic state they create, is complicit in the destruction of the identity of far more individuals. Second of all, it is our side that enlightens society and moves towards change. And third of all, we do the comparison, the type of long-run impacts on the ground that we get. Number one, the apathetic state destroys identity. Now, Ashish tells you that offense and morality-based considerations are nonetheless real, because these harms, even if they do stem from arbitrary factors, are factors we should consider. For the people who live in these communities, we may not empathize with them in the same way we would empathize with the Holocaust, but the reasons they have subjectively to themselves for seeing some actions as wrong are no less significant, especially if we want to live in a liberal world. I think OG has two responses to this. The first is to say the Holocaust is different, because the Holocaust, at some point, if we trace the history, was based on an actual real harm. Sure, but not anymore, right? Usually, many people in Jewish society today did not suffer the Holocaust directly, and I don't think Israel is going to get rid of these laws to the point where that generation dies out. I think there's significance to that society nonetheless. So, at the point where they say this is a sensibility that can be protected, I think he concedes the entire debate. He concedes the very explicit criteria that he sets out, that harm must be concrete and real for it to count. No, it counts anyway because we care about how people feel, and I think that's a good thing in debates. I think that's a huge concession, not part of this debate. I think the second thing that they eventually conceded too, and this is concerning, is they say, but it's a comparison of harms. Foucault says if you compare the harms, we have some reason to choose one group of harms over the other. Number one, I find this concerning, given that the premise of all of Gov's case is, but we're not ever in a position to weigh up harms and therefore be neutral. Second of all, I like to point out that what is lost here is not the ability to breastfeed entirely or to run the Rocky Horror Project at all. It is about being able to do these things in public as opposed to doing them in the private confines of your home. I don't think you can just say this is very important to people, they lose it entirely, unless you want to do that. Second of all, I think the default principle here when you're weighing up harms, if that is the criteria in this debate, is to consider numbers. Because for something to count as public morality, there is a significant enough majority who not only sees this as important, it is important in a way that defines what is right or wrong for that state and for that society. So, scope and scale. Many people, scope, scale, very significant, public morality. No, thank you. I think this is a huge consideration. So if you want to balance up harms, I think prima facie, this falls on our side. Third of all, I think that in this debate, we don't have to show that every society needs to care about public morality. Just that there are some societies where the degree of harm from public morality is so significant. It is about Mormon societies for whom religious strength and religious solidarity is really important. And not doing that doesn't just have an esoteric harm. It is a very real harm to the way you practice your life and how you envision the state. Or for instance, the ability to evangelize in a religious state. No. So I think that either way, the state is going to have to crush some people's identity. That's what you do anyway. I do think, however, that what we should consider is not about whether a factor is arbitrary. Who you are born and what you consider to be important in your life is arbitrary in many ways that no debater can ever fully compromise. I think that what we should care about is whether the harm is real. And I think the harm to more people is nonetheless real. We should care about that. No. Second question, how do we enlighten society? Now here I think Ashish gives you a lot of material. He says, you don't engage with the argument. I think he gives you argument for why this is invasive and you otherize them. I want to add one more thing here. I think there's a distinction between discourse that happens in a private space, in a private setting, and these actions happening in private, as opposed to what is defined by the law as a public space. I think it's because what is public is meant to be inclusive to as many people as possible, and as a result, the majority, no thank you, sees a space, literally physical spaces like town squares, which were previously meant to be comfortable for as many people as possible, and sees these being taken away as a result of the advocacy of a few individuals. Because of this distinction, I think the discourse that focuses primarily about shock and awe in one setting but not in the other is less persuasive. No, thank you. I think it is more antagonistic and as a result causes harm. Offense here in particular makes a huge difference. Which is why in Singapore, thank you, I don't think we are ever prepared to countenance in the next 10 years homosexual behavior happening on the streets, but we are more willing to say maybe it has a place in society if it happens in private. And I think that degree of invisibility, so to speak, might be harmful in the sense that it is not the ideal world we like to live in, but in an intermediary state where groups are fighting for rights, that is a protection from the sorts of backlash that could harm them. Yeah. Go ahead.
Isn't it Archie states that the world is not meant to be a safe space? Why are feelings of discomfort so important to you?
The world is not meant to be a perfect safe space, or it cannot be a perfect safe space for everyone. So we make a trade-off. Make it as safe a space as possible for the people who make up large numbers, who care about this a lot. Now, the last thing I want to deal with here is when Virat says, but this is about the choice of a few women to express themselves, or a few members of the minority. I use women as an example. Yes, but send the debate out. At the point at which your expression ends up hurting other people, I think that there is a good reason for us to think you might not want to do it, or at the very least, if we can condemn you for doing that, we should. So, what then is the impact of this? I think the impact, first of all, prima facie, is that there is a huge amount of backlash. I think this backlash very often gets worse in the way the media portrays this. Why? Media has every incentive to sensationalize, for the sake of profit, the coverage of these events of advocacy, right? So in the way the public, who already is disgusted with these acts, sees them, it's viewed through a lens which reinforces those biases. It's viewed through the lens of getting conservative individuals to come up on stage or to BBC, for instance, and say, how shocking that a mother was bearing her breast in private. And it gives you reasons, and often in a one-sided way, that you should care about these things from a conservative perspective and not a liberal one. The impact of this is quite simple. Number one, I think to the extent that rape culture is a problem, it is worse on their side. Because it is on their side where the most bigoted individuals have the most ammunition to say, look, a rape happened, but that's because of what women are doing today. They point to the way minorities make use of safe spaces and say, because they've exercised their identity, they've chosen to do so in this way, no thank you. They themselves should bear the brunt of the consequences that follow. To the extent that this is a problem, number one, gradual change that Ashi tells you about, completely unengaged, happens better on our side. Number two, gets worse on that. In the comparative, I think we win this. Second of all, I think the solution to a society that wants to hold on to its identity and hold on to its judgments it makes on people, but can't do so illegally, is that it takes even more insidious steps to change who you are from an earlier stage. Stephen Luke says you have a couple of forms of power, right? So power could exist in the form of being able to do something. It could be in the form of stopping someone from doing something. But the most insidious form of power is where you use methods to change the ideology and wants of an individual. What happens when you have a reactive majority who cares a lot about public morality being infringed, but can't use, say, legal methods to ensure it is not happening in public? And I want to emphasize this, right? It's just about what's happening in public. The answer then is to allow these things to happen technically in public, but to jump a few steps down the line, to ensure that education or religious conservatives from a young age have the power to make young boys and girls not want to do these things in the first place. That is the logical reactionary response that doesn't take a legal route if you see your society and morality as under threat. Why is this worse? It is worse because you destroy the next generation of political capital and political warriors who will fight for these things and ensure that these movements become lasting avenues for change in the long run. I think this is insidious. I think in the long run you get worse societies because you force conservatives to use this method and this method alone. Our side stands for identity, we stand for individuals, we stand for a better, albeit imperfect society. Proud to close.
Public sensibilities.
It's a group thing.
We only keep that goal button they all affect.
I would love to.
Even after this commercial break, Chin and I are still quite lost. But what we do know is that all historical progress made in the last century has been made by challenging and dismantling in the public space the definition of morality and offense set by privileged elites in their ivory towers, who create a self-perpetuating cycle of what defines public offense. Think about it. When we are born, we are blank slates. We don't have moral preferences. But what defines moral preferences is what the elite sets as a norm for offense. So we're going to avoid two things in extension. First of all, that these laws perpetuate inequality. Secondly, that they cause meaningful forms of protest. But before that, some rebuttal doesn't quite fit anywhere. They said in overall, the comparison of harms is subjective. Right, we agree. But we think that the optimal situation is one where we gradually take down the taboo that these laws create and perpetuate by themselves. The optimal situation is one where in the future, the majority becomes more okay with things that we consider currently offensive. Opening has tried to make this a direct trade-off. It isn't if we progress in the future. Even if minority majorities are against certain acts of offense now, we think there is a middle ground to make majorities in the future okay with it. How is that the case? Because the law often defines what is taboo, and to the extent that elites in power, as I will go later, continue to hold the reins of power, they continue to define what is taboo. The word damn, for instance, was considered hugely publicly offensive until a movie made it widespread in public discourse. What we can have in the future is an optimal situation where minorities are gradually able to make their forms of expression acceptable. Critically, this is the comparative. The hurt that a Christian man feels when he sees a gay couple will decrease the more and more he sees this. However, the hurt that a gay couple feels will intensify the more he is shut up and the less ability he has to express his love in the public space. It's the comparative that they miss. Critically, we think it's fair to trade off the right of the majority now not to be offended to create a future society where no one is offended or minimal people are offended. Then please give us some stuff about how the public space is different from the private space. We think this is a largely illusory distinction because your ability as a gay couple to express your love in public is part of how you conduct your lives in private. I think that's indistinguishable. First point of extension about how this perpetuates inequality. I think a question that opening councilman asks is who sets the laws that determine public responsibility? It's not often an accurate representation of the majority. But I think it's a bit one step further by explaining that the means by which the public majority and the public morality is set are shaped by the people holding on to the levers of power in politics, in film, and in the media. Laws of offense have perpetuated their own existence and created a huge status quo bias. Even as all societies becoming increasingly liberal, a conservative elite continues to hold on to the critical reins of power. Why do they have this power? They have this power because of things like privilege, a higher education that allows them to become legislators. Because they control the media, white men like Rupert Murdoch, for instance, defining and shaping public morality based on what they feel people should hear. It has to do with those who execute and put these laws into practice. People like police forces, for instance, who use offense and the flimsy definition of offense to arrest people like black protesters, holding signs saying white people are trash. We think that all these people are holding back the march of history because they define for the public what morality is. Let me give you a period illustration. In Alabama, overwhelmingly white legislators held back laws against intermarriage on paper until 2000, even though 65% of American Alabamans were already against it. Heterosexual males in many countries are advocates of laws that segregate transgender bathrooms. We think that this is harmful because human beings are born as morally blank slates, and what's best is if we have the agency to decide which moral preferences we want to acquire. We can no longer decide this if a majority dictates that some kinds of individual, some kinds of things that might trigger intuitive responses have no place in the public sphere. No, thank you. So, we think that majorities A privileged elite saying for themselves what a public morality should be is holding on to the reins of power and unfairly causing groups to be shut out from legitimate means of expression. We think that's harmful, and we're very happy to stand for the fact that such laws should not exist. Yes.
We told you that it is these conservative elites to which you will have to appeal if progress is going to happen. And an attack on public spaces in specific retrogrades their willingness to accept you.
What is our alternative to trying to overturn the edifice and wearing down the conservative elite? We think if the public has no knowledge, that perhaps they might be okay with things that we formerly thought intuitively they have an objection to. We think there's no basis for them to acquire this preference and campaign for acceptance in the first place. Furthermore, we could that the means suggested in dialogue, things like advocacy, are incredibly inaccessible. Reason being, people can't hire lawyers, not everyone has a lot of money. So we think the most beneficial form of protest, as I'll go on to explain, is one that involves an element of offense. Actually, I'll go on to it now. Why is it that the most beneficial form of protest involves offense? This deals directly with the argument about public spaces, by the way. We think that protests that involve offense happen in two instances, and they're beneficial. First of all, they allow protesters to use offense as a means to draw attention to issues related to that realm of offense. Illustration: third-wave feminists burying their breastfeeding defy the hypocrisy with how we treat the male and female nipple. We think that such protests are important, and they are a unique way to raise attention to this problem. Reason being, they are highly visceral, precisely because they are so offensive. They provoke a public debate and a public reaction immediately, rather than gradual forms of advocacy, which are less likely to garner social support and social change. So we think this intuitive reaction is important, because it's what feeds into the media and what feeds into social media's illustration of what these protests are about. So it's incredibly important that these protests are visceral, because this grants them visibility and greater outreach. We think this is important because it allows us to bring these issues into the public space. Moreover, we think that protests are a unique way using offense to challenge the notion of what should be considered offensive in the first place. As I've explained to you, we think that protests based on things like burying a breast or using the bathroom of a different gender are incredibly important, even though they are offensive, because it allows the public to come to a discussion and come to a debate, a reasoned debate about what they want offense to be like, a debate denied to them by privileged elites who set laws 30 years ago. Moreover, they told us that, essentially, we don't have a right to protest because this leads to overwhelming harm to the majority. We think your right to protest and your right to stand up against oppression is independent of the outcome of whether or not it is successful. We think that because things like advocacy are inaccessible to most people, your right to protest is the most immediate and the most critical way you can stand up in self-defense against the vast amounts of abuse that are committed to you. We don't think that your right to protest and your right to express yourself as an act of offense should be dependent on the outcome of the success of that form of protest. So we think that this gradually washes away the conservative edifice of what we consider to be publicly acceptable and morally right. And this results in a society where people can better assess their moral preferences on what they consider offensive and what they don't consider offensive. So, because I've told you why laws protecting majority morality are truly democratic, why we create better protests and more support for minorities, we're very much scared of the side of history.
Oh, wow, right.
by the private preferences of a closeted elite. I'm going to talk to you about two things. First, I'm going to talk to you about the moral arc of the universe, and second, I'll talk to you about how we bend it towards justice. First, on the moral arc of the universe. We think that moral intuitions are imprinted upon us by completely arbitrary and self-serving social actors. Who are these people? Directors and executives in Hollywood film houses, politicians who command an audience, chief editors of significant media outlets. So we think that as children or as babies, we are moral blank slates at birth, which a social elite gets to write on. The problem is, laws on offense lock in the moral status quo. People don't get a real chance or a real choice to interact with their intuitive convictions. It is an act, speaker, of sheer liberal arrogance in the 21st century to assume that the consensus that we have reached today is correct. Let me give you a few potential examples. What about pedophilia? Many of us in this audience would think, yee, right? People who touch children. But why is it so wrong if we think that pedophiles should be treated no differently as neurologically atypical from people who are LGBTQ? Why shouldn't we as a society celebrate the fact that pedophiles have access to things like hentai comic books that depict children, most likely who are being touched? Let me give another example. Trans-exclusionary radical feminism. 90% of all feminists would say, oh, these people are bigots. They think that, trans women can't be feminists. But hold on, if you actually assess some of the arguments they make, there are some rational claims that they're saying. For instance, if you're a trans woman, you can't reasonably access the lived experience of the oppression in your past. And we think, even though I don't personally agree with them, these are important ideas that should be debated in the public sphere. So don't accept the kind of liberal arrogance that they are propounding. No, Ashish tells us we must recognize that the feelings of conservatives matter too. Yes, but we must remember, right? Laws of offense are self-perpetuating. A religiously devout man feels slightly less offense every time he sees a gay pride parade because the fringe has now been dragged into the mainstream. There is an erosion of arbitrary social taboos which fuel bigotry. This means that the potency of offense is mitigated. Compare this, no thank you, to the gay couple who want to express their sexuality in public and the hurt that they feel when they are denied that agency, the hurt that they feel when they're denied the right to walk through the streets of their town with the person they love. This only intensifies over time the more you are forced to deny a crucial part of yourself. No. We think that the opening house debate about weighing up between identities is a red herring. This debate is really about which side empowers people to critically assess their own identities and impose some kind of organic agentic control over an arbitrary identity. We achieve that by removing OB markers on what can or cannot be discussed vis-a-vis social consensus. Aditya tells us, right, people can be triggered. Now, someone suffering from rape trauma might be affected by abuse. We sympathize. We understand it's hard. No, but we think that on a rule utilitarian basis, we think it's an indefensible principle. Because by that logic, we will ban all of the GOP from talking about gender. We will stop all public advertisement about war movies. We think we need to compare here the potentiality of harm. No, thank you. What can we mitigate? Our side can stand for things like sponsoring programs in school or the workplace to mitigate this harm. Our side can stand for things like ensuring public access to psychiatrists completely free on the National Health Service. But there is no way, any team on their side can get someone to live a meaningful life where he can only express a crucial part of his personhood in private. There is no alternative or no mitigatory capacity for that. No. Now, I present you a second rebuttal to Aditya's extension, the idea of propensity. The likelihood of you walking past a nudist is fairly small, but the denial of your right to express your identity in public is a certainty for the groups of people that we are talking about. So even by math, they lose. Okay, second, right? Let's talk about bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. Ashish had really a glorified backlash argument that the conservatives will get angry, so we need an optimal level of appeasement, OLA or whatever it's called, right? 4 responses. No. 1. Protests don't have to be instrumentalized as an engine for change. There is a deeper rationale for protests. They are an act of radical self-expression. There is a cathartic vow to release anger against a society which has oppressed you. Do you really think that Pussy Riot was so stupid as to try to convince the average Russian man by baring their breasts? Of course not. No, that it was a statement against a society that they were living in. Second response. Offense is a way for minorities to reclaim tools that were formerly used to denigrate them. The N-word was once considered socially offensive because it harks back to the cotton fields of Alabama and Birmingham. But it is the use of the N-word which has been normalized in the public sphere that has allowed the African American community to turn their former shackles into the steel of protest and identity. Third response. We think that staying at home and living a life denuded of meaning diminishes the voice of minorities and oppressed groups. We argue that visibility is most important for those who have been cast in shadow. Do you know why, Speaker? There is no discussion on gay rights in Iran. Because official statistics indicate that there are no gay people in Iran because they're all forced to stay at home. The lack of visibility will like to fundamentally alter the public consciousness and shape what can or cannot be discussed in a way that is fundamentally chilling with regard to the kind of social spectrums that can be discussed. Fourth response. We think, and this is also in response to Aditya's extension, that minorities can themselves use offense to send a message about victimization and oppression. One thing that we consider fairly offensive is like nudity. But very often, feminist protesters from the organization, if you give me a moment, use nudity as a way to protest the commoditization of the female body, as a way to reclaim agentic control over the temples in which they inherit. But before I go on, please.
A lot of your arguments premise an idea that children are blank slates, but they've got parents. And apart from saying these parents don't know gay people exist, why would they get more offended by the fact that their public spaces are being stolen from them?
You do have parents, but parents are one of those agents of control that shape your arbitrary identity. What we are saying is, we provide the ability for you to use offense as a mechanism or engine to question whatever identity has been foisted upon you by your parents as well. Like, parents are no different from the kinds of politicians, no different from the kinds of directors or media organizations that I talk to you about my speech. So I'm just not sure where that's going, right? So we think that when it comes to engendering social change, what is our pathway to success? We think it is true that in many cases, lots of minorities will not get the change they want. This happens on both sides. But first of all, we think that at least we give them an avenue for expression. We think that's a principle good in and of itself, that you are able to stand up against the slings and arrows of the society and act in self-defense to voice up the kinds of oppression that you have faced. Second of all, that you are given a voice. That a minority who has been ignored by the media, a minority whose concerns can be run roughshod by a majority who just doesn't care enough about your plight, is able to get the glare of international media attention in a way that can potentially get you allies. The third way which we have a pathway to success is that we think minorities are able to express their message in a way that is intimate and meaningful. We think in this case, the medium is the message. For all these reasons, I'm incredibly proud to be in closing. They speak of post-truth politics, but what I think is happening is this bizarre trend of post-truth debating, or which is to say, debating that takes place in a world that is not our own. One of the popular arguments in this post-truth debating is this idea that a world with no norms would be possible and desirable, because that's what underpins all of government bench's analysis. These guys literally think that the most important thing of the world in the world is for you to be able to actualize your own identity in the public space, ignoring the fact that in the public space you deal with other people who may have identities that are different and oppose your own, and secondly, who may inherently oppose that expression of your identity. Because the thing that these guys don't want to negotiate in this debate is the gap between the concept of offense, which some of them don't want to exist opening government, some of them think we should weaponize closing government, interesting, and the fact that you have laws governing the concept of offense. I'm going to unpack all of them. Firstly, I want to deal with this extension about using offense in good ways for closing government. Recognize that, firstly, this just doesn't engage the debate. It's kind of irrelevant to debate for reasons like, one, people remain offended by stuff, so you can continue to protest. Two, you probably get more traction out of the process, you go to jail for it. More people think you are protesting if the action you're doing is controversial. But more importantly, if you think this stuff is controversial, then you presumably also recognize that taking away this law of offense doesn't change the fact that people are offended about it. So your own analysis in the second half of this extension says offense continues to be powerful, and yet the analysis in the opening government and the first half of closing government is to say, once you do away with the laws of offense, the next day you'll wake up and you'll be like, yeah, cool, Kai can walk around the hall, with his balls hanging out, I'm totally not offended with that. So look, but on the government bench, right, it gives one mechanism as to how people change their minds. They just never actually bothered to do that. They just say we'll take away one of the obstacles, because the obstacle is the mechanism of the state. And I don't deal with this right now. This idea of public conscience being a myth and public morality being flawed, the systems of government being captured and so on and so forth. Like one, public conscience is a myth, but it's a myth you believe, right? Even if you're a blank slate as a child, the moment you step into the rest of the world and do not live in a sequestered bubble for the whole of your life, is a point where you can engage with that public conscience, the consciences of other people who are aggregated together. But more importantly, you guys presumably also believe in some form of public conscience, because at the point at which you don't believe in some version of public morality, you have dispensed with the entire edifice of the law. So I want to deal with that in a little bit. And I talk about how opening government tries to create a twisted distinction between things that are harmful and not really harmful, without telling us what the actual distinction is. But just hold that thought, right? So these guys can't actually dispense with the idea of public conscience. They believe it exists. But then they say, well, the problem with that is too slow. It's too slow because the systems of government get in the way. You can't hack into the levers of power. Recognize that in reverse is true, right? So the point is, instead of having majority control on our side, and recognize it's a majority control and there's a low barrier of participation, despite media control, despite money in politics and all that, you can still join. There's a path. It's a tough path, but it's a path. On your side, there's no path. Because firstly, you have to assume that everyone actually just agrees with you. So there's a reason why these guys only want to talk like to force speakers, right? About one example, that's breastfeeding. It's the least controversial thing, of course. Don't want to contend with this idea that once you don't have laws for public nudity, right? This guy can go out, masturbate in front of a woman, and she can't do anything about it. She literally can't do anything about it, right? Because where's the line between offense and psychological harm? No one knows. But never mind that. Recognize that they only want to engage with stuff where they're actually in the majority. So firstly, that's important. But secondly, even if you have situations where you have the majority, you don't need the majority to, you only need a minority of people who haven't changed their minds to have harms, which is to say, even if 60% of people think that you should wear clothes, I mean, probably close to 90%. You only need 2% to repeat someone's life. So the point here is, that is the no control that these guys have on their side. And you'll be really hard time changing the minds of these people who just don't want to change the norms overnight. Before I go.
Yeah, norms do exist, and even if they agree that these norms really important, why punish people for not following them?
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to get you guys in a bit, right? So this stuff is just about why this extension about offense doesn't exist and why you need some version of the levers of power to change the idea of public morality, rather than having no governor for public morality or having public morality and the decisions surrounding it being left to the mob and then deciding what we want. What is Mitchell's extension? The centerpiece of Mitchell's extension is this. We live in complex plural societies, so unlike opening government, which says societies are largely majority with some minority to protect, recognize that that's not what societies really look like today. Societies are plural with lots and lots of significant minorities, all of whom have competing interests. The question is, how can we best live together? Number of things here. The first thing is there is a need to gauge what we disapprove of. These guys accept that and they say, well, the test is, firstly they say the test is, there needs to be real harm. But then they don't actually tell us what harm looks like. Because when they say, when we point out, sometimes what someone considers offense, a different person for the same act considers it psychological harm. You're already accepting the subjectivity of that. But these guys say, if it is subjective, we should err on the fact that we cannot commit it at all, and so that psychological harm is now not a real harm. I think that's probably quite important. Mitchell gives you two reasons why that is the case. The first is, a lot of this subjective harm is stuff you don't consent to. Stuff you don't consent to because you're born into a particular identity, even if you are like say you very quickly choose what to be, so you don't consent to it. Secondly, stuff you don't consent to likely changes and becomes part of you, because it's part of your formative experiences and so on and so forth. That's why the subjective harm you feel is significant. It was truistic for them to say we will ban things that are not, we will not ban things that are not harmful, and we'll be okay with things. There's truistic for them to say like we would just be happy to do nothing in instances where there's no harm, and in all instances where harm, that when there was harm, we were happy to step in. These guys have to demonstrate why there will be no harm from these instances. The next test they gave us was to say that, but we just want to protect the majority's feelings. As long as the minority's feelings, it's fine. But often these feelings are the same, and it's something that data tells you, and it tells you that norms cut across many race, classes, and genders. And why is that? Because these norms are developed as part of the process of negotiation, which is to say that negotiation may be imperfect, it may be dominated by the majority of people who have more to say in this abstract Republican nation, but it is ultimately a negotiation regardless. And that is how you end up having a norm, such as you should wear clothes in public, which ends up not only just protecting our eyes from unpleasantness, which may be true of men or people who care about seeing other naked bodies, but also coincidentally and probably quite helpfully helps us protect women from the harms of being reminded of sexual assault and things like that. That's why we need norms in society. We just need to live together. Sometimes the stuff you like disagrees with the stuff that other people like. And you need to find a law and a norm that cuts across all of them. That's how people live in harmony.
I remember.